10 true ghost calls that shook me to my core. The phone rang at exactly 12:03 a.m. inside the small railway station office. The sound cut through the silence like a scream in the dark. George Rudkin, the night operator, jumped from his chair. No one ever called that late. The trains had stopped running hours ago, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb above his desk. He reached for the receiver, his hand trembling. "Hello," he said softly. For a few seconds, there was only static hissing, cracking, and the faint hum of something that didn't sound like the line at all. Then a weak, distant voice came through. "George." He froze. His heart began to hammer in his chest. He knew that voice. "Thomas," he whispered. The voice crackled again, broken and fading. "The signal. It's not safe. Tell them, stop the train." The line went dead. George stared at the phone, his mouth dry, his whole body shaking. It couldn't be Thomas Bennett. Thomas was dead. He had been buried 3 days ago after a crash that everyone in Lincolnshire still talked about. The signal failure had caused 2 engines to collide. Thomas had been one of the victims, but the call had come through from his number, the exact same switchboard code that Thomas used before he died. George's hand slipped from the phone. He stared out the small office window toward the empty tracks. The night outside was still. The signal light blinked red, steady and silent in the fog. Yet somehow, in that moment, George swore he could see a figure standing near it. Faint, glowing pale like mist, watching him from the edge of the darkness. And then the phone rang again. Earlier that evening, George had been sitting alone, flipping through his old shift log. He'd worked the night lines for almost 20 years, but nothing about the station ever felt right after Thomas's death. The walls seemed to breathe when the wind pushed through the cracks. The old copper wires along the walls sometimes hummed on their own. He missed his friend. Thomas Bennett had been like a brother, always bringing hot coffee during cold shifts, always laughing at George's bad jokes. They'd spent years together, keeping the trains on time and the signal steady. But that night, 3 days ago, had changed everything. A warning light had failed at the crossing near the marshland. Thomas had gone out to check it in the fog. Moments later, the collision happened. The sound of twisting metal and screaming engines echoed all the way to the station. George had run out there, screaming his name, but by the time he reached him, Thomas was gone, his body pinned beneath the wreck. The investigators blamed faulty wiring. George blamed himself. Since that night, he hadn't slept properly. Every time the phone buzzed, his stomach turned. Every gust of wind across the tracks made him jump. But nothing, not even the nightmares, could prepare him for that call at midnight. He took a deep breath and picked up the phone again, his voice shaking. "Thomas, if that's you, please say something." Only static. Then, softly, a whisper, "The signal." George slammed the phone down and stumbled backward. He could feel the blood drain from his face. Was it a prank? A cross line? Or something else? He checked the switchboard records. The call had come from line 12, the one connected to the signal shed, the same shed that had been destroyed in the crash. The number had been disconnected after Thomas's death. George grabbed his lantern and coat and stepped out into the cold. The fog rolled thick across the tracks. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under his boots. As he got closer to the signal light, his breath came out in short bursts. He stopped about 10 feet away and froze. The signal bulb flickered twice, red, then white, a pattern no one had programmed. And then he heard it again, a faint, human voice whispering through the static of the wind. "George, not safe." His lantern flickered and went out. He turned in every direction, but the fog was too heavy. He could barely see the tracks beneath him. Then, from somewhere behind him, he heard the soft buzz of a phone ringing, out there in the middle of the empty yard. George followed the sound, heart pounding. It came from a small utility box near the wreck site, the same one where they'd found Thomas's broken headset. The door was open, wires hanging loose. Inside, a phone receiver dangled, swaying gently. It was ringing, though the line had been dead for days. He reached out slowly. The moment his fingers brushed the phone, the ringing stopped. Then the voice returned, louder this time, crackling and distorted. You didn't stop it. George stumbled backward, tripping over a rail. His lantern rolled into the gravel, casting a weak glow across the ground, and that's when he saw the footprint. A single wet print beside the box. A boot mark identical to the kind Thomas used to wear. The air grew colder. His breath fogged in front of him. The signal light behind him blinked red again, and then flickered wildly like lightning. George's chest tightened. He turned toward the tracks just as a low rumble filled the air. No trains were scheduled that night. He squinted through the fog. The sound grew louder, the screech of metal on rails, the blast of a horn echoing through the valley. But there was nothing there. George dropped to his knees, covering his ears as the sound roared past him, invisible, deafening, gone in seconds. When he opened his eyes again, the yard was silent. Only the signal light burned red in the mist. And then the phone rang again, louder, longer, relentless. He stumbled to his feet and ran back toward the office, nearly tripping on the steps. Inside, the phone was still ringing. He picked it up with trembling hands. "Thomas, please. What do you want from me?" The voice on the other end was calm now, steady, almost human. "You weren't supposed to let them go." "Who?" George shouted. "Who wasn't I supposed to let go?" Static filled the line, and then a new sound. A train horn, but not from outside. It was coming through the phone. George's eyes widened. He dropped the receiver, but the sound kept playing, the horn, the brakes screeching, the same awful crash he'd heard 3 nights ago. And then, through the noise, came the faint voice of Thomas again, whispering one last sentence. "They're coming back." The lights in the office flickered once, twice, and went out completely. The lights went out so suddenly that George could barely see his own hands. The hum of the office faded into total silence, broken only by the faint ringing of the phone still dangling from the desk. The air felt heavier now, colder, like something unseen was breathing right next to him. "Thomas?" he whispered into the dark. "Thomas, please, stop this." No reply came, just that soft ring echoing again. George fumbled for his lantern and lit it, the weak flame trembling. As the light filled the room, he saw that the phone line had been torn from a wall. It wasn't even connected anymore, yet the bell was still ringing. He lifted the receiver, hands shaking. "Who is this?" he demanded. There was a pause, then a whisper. "They're still out there." The sound wasn't like before. It wasn't just Thomas's voice. It was deeper, layered, as if more than one person was speaking from the other side. Then came a faint rumble, a metal clank, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy boots walking across the gravel outside the office. George froze. He turned slowly toward the window. Outside, the signal light flashed again, red, white, in a pattern he had never seen before. His lantern flickered, and for a brief second he saw something through the glass. Shadows moving in the fog. For maybe 5 figures walking along the tracks, shoulders slumped, faces hidden in the mist. He couldn't breathe. The sound of boots scraping metal filled the air. Then one of the figures turned its head toward him. The glow from the lantern caught the faint outline of a face pale, wet and covered in soot. It looked exactly like Thomas Bennett. George stumbled backward, knocking his chair over. The phone clattered to the floor, the voice on the line dissolving into static. The figures outside vanished into the fog, leaving behind only silence. He rushed to the door and locked it. His hands were shaking too much to hold the key steady. Then, with a deep breath, he tried to reason with himself. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe someone from the maintenance crew had come early. Maybe... The horn sounded again. It was close. Too close. George ran to the window. The fog glowed faintly with a pale, golden shimmer, the kind of light you'd see from a train's front beam. But no engine was scheduled, and the tracks were supposed to be shut down for the night. He threw open the radio cabinet and grabbed the transmitter. "Control, this is Rudkin at Eastbourne Station. I'm seeing unauthorized movement on the main line. Is there a test run tonight?" Static. He tried again. "Control, come in." The radio crackled, but this time the voice that came through wasn't Control. "Too late, George." The same hollow tone, the same breathy sound that came from Thomas's call. George slammed the radio off and ran outside, determined to see what was really happening. The fog was thick as milk now, swallowing everything. He could barely see 10 feet ahead. The signal light flickered wildly, the red beam stretching across the tracks like a wound in the mist. Then he saw it. Faint headlights cutting through the fog, the sound of wheels grinding, brakes screeching. He stepped back, his pulse racing. A train was coming straight toward the station, but its lights looked wrong, dim, uneven, almost flickering. "Hello," he shouted. "Who's on that engine?" The train grew closer, its horn echoing in the distance. George squinted, tried to make out the number on the front, but as it approached, his stomach dropped. There was no number, no markings. The engine looked rusted, melted, and covered in ash. Through the front window, he could see faces staring out, gray, hollow-eyed, and lifeless. The train wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was the same one that crashed 3 nights ago. He stumbled backward as the ghostly engine roared past, though there was no wind, no vibration, no sound of steel against steel, only the echo of it in his mind. Then, as the fog thinned for a brief moment, George saw something lying across the tracks ahead. A small toolbox, his name scratched into the lid. He didn't remember leaving it there. His legs moved before his mind could catch up. He ran toward the box, his lantern swinging. When he reached it, he knelt down and brushed off the dirt. Inside were tools, a folded note, and a cracked photograph, one of him and Thomas smiling at the station. The note beneath it was written in dark pencil, the letters shaky and uneven. "It wasn't your fault, but you have to fix it before they come back." George's heart pounded. He looked up toward the signal light. It was flashing faster now. Something deep inside the wiring hummed like a heartbeat. He stood, clutching the note. "Fix what?" he whispered. Behind him, the phone inside the office started ringing again. He turned toward the sound, but before he could take a single step, a voice whispered right beside his ear, close enough that he could feel the breath. They never stopped the train. He spun around, but no one was there. Only fog, stretching endlessly down the tracks. The phone rang louder, faster, the bell clanging wildly like it was screaming for attention. He ran back inside, slammed the door, and grabbed the receiver. "Who is this?" "What do you want?" The line hissed. Then a faint child's voice spoke, one he'd never heard before. 10 calls, George. 10 warnings. You missed the first 9. He froze. What does that mean? But the voice didn't answer. It only whispered, "The last one is coming." The lights flickered again. The signal outside turned from red to green, a clear sign for a train to pass. But there was no train scheduled. None at all. And then George heard the sound again, that low, terrible rumble building beneath the floorboards, the vibration shaking the entire station. He turned toward the window, lantern shaking in his hand, and saw the impossible, the ghostly train barreling straight toward him, brighter, louder, faster than before. It wasn't stopping this time. The ground trembled as the phone fell from his hand, and the line filled with screams, voices of men and women calling his name, all echoing through the static like 1,000 lost souls. The window shattered. The lantern went out, and then everything went dark.